Okay. Let's talk about Black Widow for a second. You know, this is an interesting movie. I still say that it should have come out before Infinity War or Avengers Endgame, but the fact is that we got it now. And given the way the movie ended, it's probably not a bad thing, right? It leaves a lot of stuff open, and I can definitely see why they released it now as opposed to releasing it at a previous point in time. Because the reality was that in the time frame where you had the movies coming out that were going into Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, they were all kind of segueing into it. And so there wasn't a whole lot in the way of the ability to produce a movie like this and have it basically be open-ended where it's like the Black Widows will return, ... and then go into like Avengers Endgame, right? That it would seem a little off. And so I can definitely see why they released it now. But let's talk about a few things, right? So the Red Room, I think I have all this stuff explained on Comics Explained, the Red Room, the Red Guardian. I don't know if we ever made a video on Black Widow, now that I think about it. I feel like we should, if we haven't already. But there's a lot of stuff to know here, right? A lot of things to go on. You know, starting with the idea of the Red Room and with the Red Guardian. When they first announced that Red Guardian was gonna be part of the Black Widow movie, my initial thought was, okay, cool, we're gonna get the Winter Guard. And then as they started releasing trailers, like obviously, you know, you saw Red Guardian, he looked like the kind of guy who's like, you know, back in my day, he was older, and it's like, okay, so this isn't gonna be the Winter Guard. I don't know what this guy's backstory is gonna be, but it's not gonna have anything to do with the Winter Guard. What's the Winter Guard? Okay, so in Marvel Comics, the Winter Guard was Russia's answer to the Avengers. The idea of the Avengers coming together presented this kind of threat in the eyes of Russia of, okay, so like the United States now has a superpowered team. So what Russia did is they started traveling around their country and quite literally snatching people up. Anybody that had any powers was just conscripted into the Russian superhero team, the Winter Guard. Not all of them made it, but some of them did. So getting into the Red Room itself, if the Winter Guard was Russia's answer to the Avengers, then the Red Room was Russia's answer to Weapon Plus. Weapons Plus was a joint venture between the United States CIA and Canada's Department H/Department K. All this stuff, you'll find links to all this stuff down in the description over at Comics Explained. But the cool thing here is that with Weapon 1, because of the fact that Captain America was frozen in ice, Weapons Plus started going through and launching a whole bunch of other programs. So you had Weapon 2, Weapon 3, Weapon 4, all the way up to Weapon X, also known as Wolverine. And so the whole idea of the Red Room was to basically create Russia's counterpart to Wolverine. That if Wolverine was going to be this kind of assassin, super soldier-esque character that would basically be a step ahead of everything Captain America was, then Russia wanted to have the same thing. And that's where the Red Room comes from. The Red Room is basically exactly what you saw between all of Black Widow's appearances, which is the desire to create these enhanced super soldiers that can basically carry out assassination missions. The funny thing about this is that if you go in to read Marvel Comics, the origin of Laura Kinney, X-23, is actually far more close in line with the story of the Red Room than Wolverine is, right? That's kind of a weird and a little bit of a wonky thing. But the important thing here is that there's a point in the movie when there's a statement made by Melina, which is the technology and the stuff that she was working on started in the States, and then she took it to Russia. There's no reason to believe that they can't use this to basically launch Wolverine, right? To introduce Wolverine, because they say it started with Hydra. And I have a video where I basically say, like, here's how you introduce the X-Men into the MCU. You start with Wolverine and you basically say that Hydra was the one that did it, right? So I think it works perfectly, right? If you say it all started with Hydra. But nonetheless, there's cool stuff that goes on there, right? It's one of the reasons why Black Widow can have a huge impact on the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe if it's done correctly. Having said that, I loved Red Guardian. I loved Alexei. He was hilarious. I loved his character. He was awesome. I was praying to God over the course of the movie that he wouldn't die. Thank God he didn't. I was afraid they were gonna kill him and Melina off at the very end when like they end up kind of careening down in that jet. I thought it was gonna crash and they just kind of silently write them out and like they find their bodies just sort of just spread all over the place and it's like, oh my God, they didn't make it, you know, or something like that. I was really hoping that wouldn't happen and it didn't. I'm so glad to see he's staying there. I'm really curious to see what role they play because one of the things that kind of comes out of this is that we have like the Avengers, right? We have the whole Avengers landscape, Avengers 1, Avengers 2, Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame. Now's the time for the new Avengers, right? And I could easily see them launching the Winter Guard based on the new Avengers, right? Basically saying, okay, so like Russia's gonna now have its own Avengers team that operates as a kind of complement to the Avengers from the United States. Now, the reality is they weren't really friends, right? It's not like you saw a lot of team ups between the Winter Guard and the Avengers. I mean, they worked together if the threat was big enough, but by and large, it was you stay away, we stay away, that kind of a thing. With regards to Black Widow, because of the fact that she was kind of the missing link, right? Kind of the connection between these two things, and she was one part Avenger and then one part had really one part Black Widow with a Russian heritage. I could easily see that kind of bridging the gap, but there's no reason to believe that like they would all be friends, right? It's like, well, we all knew Black Widow. Okay, cool, let's pop some beers. Cheers, everyone. Like, I don't think that's really gonna be the case. So, you know, it's gonna be interesting to see how it unfolds. I absolutely loved Black Widow's sister. Oh my God, I loved her character. She was fantastic. Honestly, and we all pretty much know she's gonna become the new Black Widow. There's no reason to indicate that's not gonna be the case, right? And I'm looking forward to that. I'm excited about that, right? I love that idea of her becoming the new Black Widow in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She fits the role perfectly, especially when you get to the post-credits scene. And you've got the whole scene with Valentina, which, by the way, wow, like I never thought we would see that kind of like post-credits crossing over between Falcon and the Winter Soldier and like the Black Widow film, right? Literally, Valentina is the post-credit scene. Not even a post-credit scene. She like meets with John Walker, US agent, right? And then you see her in a post-credit scene here. It's cool, man. Like I love seeing that. This is what it originally should have been, right? You guys remember back in the day when you had like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, that terrible Iron Fist show? Like you guys remember all that? This is what it should have been. This is exactly what it should have been like. But the important thing here is that these little bit of crossovers, these post-credit scenes and stuff like that, that's cool, right? And we know that she's basically gonna go after Clint Barton now, which I think is gonna be a little bit of history repeating itself, right? She's gonna go after Clint Barton. Clint Barton's gonna tell her what actually happened, that he and Natasha were really good friends, they were besties, they probably banged. I don't know why they wouldn't have, but they were like besties at one point. And then in turn, like, you know, they were fighting over who was gonna sacrifice their life for the Infinity Stone, right? You know, your sister was honorable, she was a great person, and I would have given my life for her, and I tried to, and yada, 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 so on and so forth. And they're gonna go forward as friends, right? Like that kind of thing's gonna happen. I don't really think she's gonna go forward as like an enemy of Clint Barton and just be like, you're lying about the whole thing with Vormir. There's no way that's true, even though it probably is because stranger things have happened. But regardless, I loved her character, right? I love the portrayal of her character. Having said that, let's talk about Taskmaster, right? Because this is the other thing that I think a lot of people want to know about too. Let's talk about Taskmaster. You know, a lot of people are pissed that it's not Tony Masters. I wouldn't say I'm mad. I would say I'm more disappointed because I really wanted to see Tony Masters in the MCU. The biggest issue I have with Taskmaster is why the character even exists in the first place, right? Like, it seems like the whole idea of Taskmaster was kind of an afterthought, right? Like, everybody sat down, they made the Black Widow movie, and they said, we need a thing that happens in the film that is the motivation for why she has this dark and tragic history, this thing we've been alluding to over the course of her appearances in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we needed to tie into Budapest. And so as they were thinking about this, they said, you know what, let's have her kill the daughter of the guy she needs to kill so she can get to the guy in order to kill him to escape from the Black Widow program and then get to S.H.I.E.L.D. And then we'll just have this little girl come back later on as Taskmaster. The motivation's just not there, right? It's just not, it's flimsy. It's really, 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 really flimsy. One of the things that I did like, one of the things that I loved is they kept the idea of Taskmaster. Here's the funny thing about Tony Masters in Marvel Comics, right? Again, it's not Tony Masters in the movie, but the concept remains the same. So Tony Masters was born with basically muscle memory. He could look at what people were doing and then his muscles would memorize it. Now, over time, he actually consumed a serum that enhanced that ability. And it actually pushed them to the point that as Taskmaster fights an opponent, not only does he basically learn to fight the way they do, he can actually predict what they're gonna do before they do it. Most of the people that attend Taskmaster school are usually villains, right? Like Crossbones is a good example of that. You guys remember Crossbones from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? You guys remember him? And the comics, he basically trained at Taskmaster school. And there's a lot of other people who have. But there's also heroes that train with Taskmaster. Captain America's trained with him, Wolverine's trained with him, Shang-Chi, Spider-Man. A lot of these guys have trained with Taskmaster because fighting him is fighting a whole host of enemies. But all in all, I wouldn't really say that I dislike the idea that Taskmaster is a girl. My biggest issue is that it seemed like the motivation for why Taskmaster exists is flimsy at best. At the very least, you know, I am glad to see that Taskmaster is continuing on, because I'm not gonna lie, my biggest fear is that Marvel was gonna kill her off. And I was like, man, like Marvel kills their villains, man. Like Marvel, it's the one thing that I hate about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I love practically everything else. You talk to anybody who's been reading Marvel Comics long enough and they will tell you William Stryker, Magneto, Apocalypse, depending on who's writing them, more often than not, the villains are more interesting than the heroes. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe kept killing them off. And it was pissing me off to no end. So I'm so glad to see that Taskmaster survived until the end of this. It feels like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is finally learning its lesson. Like, okay, maybe we should stop killing the villains. Fingers crossed, it lasts for any real measure of time. But regardless, the movie was cool. Is it the best thing there ever was? No. Black Widow just seems to fall pretty short, right? It just doesn't have that kind of pizzazz that like the other movies had. And I think a lot of that's based on the fact that Black Widow is not really an exceptional character. She's just a really capable chick who fights well. And so it's kind of hard to craft a solo movie around that that's very, very compelling, especially in the face of a movie like Black Panther or Doctor Strange. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think about the movie down in the comments, and I will catch you all later. Peace.